Guys, welcome to my channel. We are reading Monstrata Diaries, Frankenstein, and the New Ghoul at school. We are on chapter 7. That's the only chapter we're going to be reading today. It is a longer chapter, so here we go. Chapter 7. As the afternoon light faded away, the ghouls agreed to split up and continue their search. Dinner time came and went, but still Frankie wasn't ready to give up the hunt. She, Jackalora, and Claudine continued to search in their little group until last light of day was exhausted. By the time night rolled around, even Frankie had to admit they needed to take a break until morning. After saying goodnight to her ghoul friends, she ran home to a great Watsit. Frankie had missed him so much while she was away from school. Somehow the search for Zap Pit had made her even more eager to spend extra time cuddling with Watsit when she got home. "Hey, Dad," Frankie said, poking her head into the lab after she and Watsit had played a quick game of fetch. He trailed behind her, then settled into his little bed in the lab for a snooze. Frankie could tell Watsit had begun to enjoy his time in the lab with also as much as she did. "Frankie," her dad exclaimed, looking up from his lab bench. "Did you find Zap Pit yet?" Frankie shook her head sadly. "Not yet. We've been searching for hours, but there are just so many places she could be hiding." Mr. Stein pulled her close for a hug. "You'll find her, and you need worry about her safety. I'm sure she's going to be fine." "That's exactly what Isel said," Frankie said, nodding. "It's hard not to worry, though. She's my first creation. I just can't believe she's gone." Mr. Stein smiled. "I understood exactly how protective an inventor can be with his creations." He smiled. He said, smiling at her. Then he looked at his watch and gasped, "Speaking of my creations, I can't believe you are still awake. Look at how late it is, Frankie." "I couldn't get sleep when I knew you were still here working," she admitted. "Ah," her dad said, grinning. "Do you have the inventor's curse?" "What's that?" Frankie asked. "Does the lab call you even when you should be doing other things?" he said. "I guess a little bit," she admitted. Mr. Stein rubbed his hands together. "Excellent. And you are so distracted by your ideas that it's sometimes hard to stop working for meals or friends or other activities." "I'm not as bad as you get, Dad," Frankie said with a laugh. "I always have time for meals and my ghoul friends. Mom is right, you know. You probably should get out of the lab a little more often." Mr. Stein shrugged. "Yeah, I guess I really should." "Also," Frankie said, "I had an idea." "Want to talk about other snacks upstairs?" Mr. Stein looked around his lab sadly. "You want me to go upstairs and leave my precious?" He broke off suddenly and looked at her sheepishly. "What I meant to say is, of course I would love to go upstairs and enjoy a snack and a chat with my precious daughter." As they made their way up the stairs, Frankie said, "I think it's a good thing I'm going to be spending more time working in there with you from now on. Dad, I'm going to make it my mission to help you remember that life exists outside the lab." "I like the sound of that," Mr. Stein said, greeting Mrs. Stein said, greeting her husband and daughter inside the kitchen. "Sounds like you have some very good advice for your dad, Frankie." Mr. Stein laughed as he made himself a cup of tea. "So, what's this idea you've had?" Frankie grabbed a cookie from the cookie jar and took a big bite. "I was wondering if you've ever had a good luck creating a tracking device in the lab. I was sort of inspired by the GPS tracking program Ghoulia and one of the new monsters Exchange Ghoul started working on today, it got me thinking maybe we should try to build something in the lab that would help me find Zaphit. Something that's magnetism or something? Mr. Stein said. Interesting. Perhaps magnetism, and he began muttering to himself, and Frankie and her mother exchanged a look. So? Frankie asked, nudging him to get his attention back. Think it's possible? Sure, it's definitely possible. I'm not sure if it's something we could put together overnight, but I could certainly try. He pulled his eyebrows together and concentrated, and Frankie could tell his mind was already whipping through possible designs and specifications in his head. I like the way you're thinking. Can we start working on it right away? Frankie begged. Mr. and Miss Stein exchanged a worried look. It's very late, said Miss Stein. Then she added, but if working in the lab will help you feel like you're doing something more to find your pet, then I suppose you could spend a little while in there with your dad tonight. As long as your homework is done, Mr. Stein added. All done with my homework already, Frankie cheered, cramming her fall project into just a few days had taught her not to wait until the last minute. Again. She shoved the last of her cookie in her mouth and dashed towards the stairs. Let's get started right away. By the time Frankie and her dad closed up the lab for the night, they had already made great progress on a search bot. Mr. Stein promised Frankie he would continue to work on it the next day while she was at school. He hoped to have it ready by the time school was out. Frankie was exhausted when she finally went to bed. Working in the lab was both exhilarating and exhausting. She curled around Watson and then fell into a deep, dreamless slumber. When she woke up in the morning, she checked Zaphit's charging station in the lab, just in case her little creature had returned in the night. But as she knew would be the case, there was still no sign of her. Frankie got dressed quickly and rushed to the school, posting more missing signs everywhere between her house and Monster High. As Frankie unloaded her things to her locker, Isol rushed up and squealed, I found Zaphit! Frankie threw her arms around Isol. That's flirtatious, so where was she? Isol took a deep breath, right where I saw her the first night. Last night I went back there. When I closed my eyes and danced in the light of the moon, I felt something creep up beside me. I opened my eyes and there she was. It was almost as though she had been waiting for me to come to dance. Seriously? Frankie asked. Do you think she was hiding out in the forest the whole time? I thought I saw something moving in one of the trees yesterday. Do you think it could have been her? I bet the tracking Batsy and Venus found were hers. Possibly, Isol said, nodding. It's also possible she was hiding from us. She seems very shy, and she resisted following me when I called to her. So where is she now? Frankie asked, hustling along beside Isol as they made their way to their first class. Isol took a deep breath and looked Frankie in the eye. Frankie could sense something was wrong. Isol told her, when she came to my side last night, I checked her over right away to make sure she wasn't hurt. Then I tried to lend her out of the woods, but as soon as we neared the edge of the forest, she stopped and didn't move any further. Isol's eyes filled with tears, and she said, I'm so sorry, Frankie. I helped her build a small, cozy den on the edge of the woods. I checked on her as soon as I woke up this morning, and she was content and happy as can be. Isol smiled. She just is the sweetest little creature. I must admit, spending time with her was such a comfort to me last night. I went into the forest feeling sad about missing my family, and then Zaphit was at my side, and I instantly felt so much better. Being near her somehow made me feel a little homesick. Made me feel less homesick. Oh, Isol, Frankie said, nearly bursting at her seams with relief. I am so sorry to hear that you were feeling so homesick. I'm glad Zaphit brought you some comfort. Thank you for taking care of her last night. Will you show me where her den is after school? I can come pick her up there. Isol paused, and Frankie thought she saw a brief flicker of sadness pass her ghoul friend's face. Why don't I bring you to her? You, Isol said. Finally, now that she has danced with me, I believe we have bonded, and I think she has grown to trust me. Maybe if she and I dance to your house together, she might feel more comfortable being led out of the woods. She seems to have decided she loves my dancing, Isol said with a shrug and a smile. Besides, if I bring her to you, I could see where she was created. Your dad's lab sounds so freaky fab. That would be great, and you're right. Dad's lab is totally voltacious. Frankie grinned. I can introduce you to Watsit, too. Who's Watsit? Isol asked. Watsit was my first pet. My dad created him for me, out of the spare parts he had in the lab. He's part of the reason I created Zappit in the first place. I'm hoping the two of them will like having each other to hang out with during the day while I'm away from school. What a nice idea, Isol said. Watsit is a very lucky pet. Frankie settled into her seat next to Draculaura, making sure there was an open seat for Isol on the other side. Then she told Isol, Watsit loved having me around last week during the Scaremaster break. I bet he's sad that Zappit ran off before they ever really got a chance to get to know each other. I can't wait to see the two of them playing together. It will be so cute. Suddenly Isol frowned. What is it? Frankie asked. Isol shook her head. It's just some animals are solitary creatures, Frankie. There are many animals who prefer to spend their time alone. How sad, Frankie explained. All alone? Isol laughed. Many animals love to be alone. Some monsters, too. Not everyone longs for a pack like you do. Some creatures take comfort when they are in smaller groups or solo. Like Twyla, she prefers the company of just a few ghoul friends rather than many. Do you think that's why Zappit ran away? Frankie asked worriedly, because she wanted to be alone. It's a possibility, Isol admitted. She seemed so shy when she approached me in the forest, and she waited until it was quiet to join me. This is something to consider. It's possible she didn't know what to do when faced with the company of a little creature like Watsit. Frankie was shocked. She hadn't even considered the possibility that her two pets wouldn't get along. She had assumed they would hit it off as instant BMFFs. After all, they were designed in the same lab. They were destined to be buddies, weren't they? I may be monstrously wrong, Isol said when she noticed a concerned look on Frankie's face. But it is one possibility explanation. Suddenly she spotted Twyla across the room and waved. Oh, Frankie, I told Twyla. I'd sit with her during class today. Want to join us? Frankie glanced over at Draculaura. I'm going to stay here with Draculaura. We always sit next to each other. Okay, then. If you don't mind, I'm going to go over there, Isol said as she gathered up her books. Frankie felt a pang of jealousy. Didn't Isol want to spend much time with her as she did? She shook it off and said, Of course, I don't mind. I'm so glad you and Twyla are becoming such good school friends. Isol grinned and walked across the classroom to take a seat in the back next to Twyla. Isol seemed so sweet, Draculaura said, leaning close to Frankie just as class was starting. She and Twyla make a great pair. They really do, Frankie agreed. Twyla and Isol were a perfect match, just like she and Draculaura and Claudia make a voltacious threesome. Have you told her about the fear-leading squad? Cleo asked, turning around in her seat. I've seen her dancing around the halls, and it seems like she could be a fab fear leader. I'd love to have her on our squad. I haven't talked to her about the activity yet, Frankie said. I felt a little twinge of regret. She'd been so focused on the search for Zappit, she'd forgotten to do everything she could to make Isol feel at home, as a part of Monster High community. Was that why Isol didn't want to spend more time with her? But I will, promise. All through class, Frankie thought about how glad she was to have Isol as a new ghoul friend. Thanks to her, she would probably get Zappit back to that very afternoon. And on top of that, Frankie already had an idea for her next lab creation, thanks to Isel. She couldn't wait to get started on it just as soon as Zaphit was home again. Diary entry. I was so excited to see Zaphit when Isel brought her home to me today that I sparked like crazy. I almost zapped poor Zaphit. Zaphit was being shy around me, but I think she was happy to be home. At least I hope so. It was so much fun showing Isel around Dad's lab today. He showed her all his creep-terrific machines and even let her combine 2 beakers of liquid to let her see what would happen. She totally freaked out when the new mixture started fizzing and spitting. She dropped it, and the whole thing exploded in sparks. Dad and I both cracked up, but Isel didn't think it was quite as funny. She grabbed Zaphit for comfort. Then she and my little creature rubbed noses and danced around together. The two of them really do have a connection. I'll have to be sure to invite Isel over to visit her a lot. My dad was acting super proud when he started telling Isel about how I'd constructed Zaphit, with almost no help from him, and also about my idea for the tracking bot. I love this special bond I have with him. I can't wait to tell him my plan for what I'm going to build next. After Dad gave Isel the lab tour, she and I hung out in my room for a while, watching Zaphit and Watsit while they played. Or, more like not play. My 2 pets don't really have the connection I thought they would, but I'm hoping if I give them some time, they'll get their gears in sync. When we first got to my room, Watsit wouldn't stop barking. So Zaphit started growling. Then after a few minutes of sniffing each other curiously, they retreated to the opposite ends of the room and curled up. Watsit at my side and Zaphit beside Isel. So scary cute. Well, I guess we'll see how things go. I'll get Zaphit charged up. Then the 2 of them can take all the day tomorrow to get to know each other better. Frankie. And that is the end of chapter 7, guys. I will see you guys in chapter 8.